My name is John Reynolds, and I am 42 years old. I've spent over 20 years in the military, most of them stationed at Fort Neepville in Illinois, the base I consider home. I returned recently from a deployment that tested every ounce of patience and endurance I had, and I expected a warm welcome, a quiet routine, and a chance to get back into the flow of base operations. My family has always been my anchor. My wife, Laura, runs the household with an efficiency that rivals any officer I've worked under, and our two kids, Hannah and Ben, are the reason I keep perspective when things get messy at work. Growing up in a small Midwestern town, I learned early that hard work and patience were the only things that guaranteed stability. It wasn't just about duty or rank, it was about integrity, accountability, and knowing the weight of your responsibilities. Those lessons carried me through every mission, every deployment, and now they were about to be tested in ways I hadn't anticipated. The base had changed while I was away. Young officers were moving into positions with titles that sounded impressive but carried little substance, and one in particular, Kyler, had caught my attention immediately. He was 30, just promoted to a role overseeing morale and logistics innovation, and he strutted through the halls with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. His presence was impossible to ignore. It was a constant reminder that experience alone didn't guarantee respect anymore. I watched him from a distance, taking note of how he spoke over subordinates and dismissed the work of veterans who had built the very systems he was now managing. The first encounter was subtle, almost ceremonial. Kyler called a meeting to discuss restructuring and fresh ideas, and I was there because protocol demanded it. HR sat nearby, pens poised but eyes averted, unwilling to intervene even when his tone turned condescending. I could feel the humiliation creeping in, but I stayed calm. I had learned long ago that panic and reaction had no place in strategy, and that even in moments of public embarrassment, there was always a path to regain control. The tension in that room was palpable, yet I kept my hands steady, my voice flat, and my mind focused. Even in that early moment, I knew this wasn't just about a clash of egos or a generational divide. This was about principles, authority, and understanding the full scope of what I controlled both legally and operationally. I walked out of that first meeting with my composure intact, already mapping out the steps I would take to assert my position. I knew that the next moves would require patience, precision, and leveraging knowledge that Kyler and his supporters had never bothered to acquire. The challenge was set and I was ready. The meeting room was stark, the fluorescent lights casting sharp shadows on the walls, and I could feel every eye on me as Kyler launched into his presentation. He spoke quickly, confidently, and with a tone that left no room for disagreement, treating ideas I had nurtured for years like they were playground experiments. HR sat nearby, pens poised but faces blank, unwilling to intervene or acknowledge the history that I carried with me in every project and decision. As Kyler outlined his so-called innovations and dismissals, flashes of the past ran through my mind. I remembered training young recruits in freezing January mornings, explaining the importance of precision in supply chains, and staying late to mentor officers who were now taking notes and nodding politely while ignoring my presence. Every patrol route, every logistical adjustment I had overseen, every late-night briefing was built into the foundation of this base, and yet here was a 30-year-old telling me that my methods were outdated. My stomach tightened, but I did not flinch, knowing that any visible reaction would only embolden him. The tension in the room was almost tangible, a quiet hum of expectation and unease. Kyler waved his slides and diagrams, punctuating points with exaggerated gestures, clearly enjoying the performance, and I could feel the humiliation pressing down. I breathed slowly, deliberately, and reminded myself of the times I had faced worse in the field. Patience and calm were the only strategies that ever worked. I glanced at the faces around the table. Some of the younger officers looked confused, some hesitant, and a few were already taking mental notes of where they might stand when the storm settled. I could see the old familiar faces of my colleagues in spirit, the ones who had retired, moved on, or were no longer here, all of them shaping the lessons that had brought me to this point. They had taught me that strategy required observation, restraint, and timing, and that sometimes the battlefield was not a field at all but a room full of observers, contracts, and egos. Kyler's tone shifted slightly, a smirk creeping across his face as he made a comment about old-school thinking holding back progress. My jaw tightened, not from anger, but from the need to stay composed. I had seen arrogance before. Officers fresh from school or promotion, believing experience was irrelevant, and I had learned that their confidence often concealed ignorance. I let him speak, letting every word sink in, cataloging the mistakes, oversights, and misjudgments he displayed. Every careless gesture and misinformed assertion was ammunition I would store for later. A brief flashback hit me then, of my first assignment at this base, mapping supply lines with nothing but paper maps and a keen sense of terrain. I remembered nights spent in freezing rain, double-checking every manifest, every shipment, ensuring nothing jeopardized the mission or the men under my charge. That work had shaped me, forged discipline and clarity, and now it gave me perspective. Kyler could make noise, but he could not erase decades of experience, strategy, and the quiet authority earned through action. By the time the meeting ended, I had said almost nothing, only asking questions that exposed gaps in Kyler's understanding without directly challenging him. He expected reactions, drama, confrontation, anything that would give him the upper hand. I gave him none. I left the room calm, my mind already moving through contingencies, legalities, and tactical leverage I could employ to regain control. The humiliation stung, but it also sharpened my focus, reminding me that patience and careful planning were often more powerful than immediate confrontation. The battle had not ended, it had merely begun. Sitting in my office late at night, I ran through the paperwork I had kept for years, the legal agreements and deeds my father had entrusted to me before he passed. The base itself had always been more than a workplace. It was a legacy, tied to family decisions and administrative foresight that most of my colleagues ignored. I had never flaunted it, never drawn attention, but now every clause, every contract, and every document could serve a purpose. I pulled out the original base acquisition files, noting the chain of ownership, the trust agreements, and the clauses that guaranteed oversight authority even decades later. Each page reminded me of the careful planning my family had invested in the property, and of the foresight that had made me a steward rather than just an employee. Kyler and the new command structure had no idea how much oversight I retained, nor had they considered that any misstep on their part could trigger these legal safeguards. I moved to the base security monitors, cameras still operational from systems I had authorized years ago. I scanned the feed, tracking Kyler as he moved through the halls, gesturing, directing his team with the confidence of someone who thought the building was his to modify. It was almost comical how oblivious he was to the fact that every step, every unauthorized adjustment, was being recorded and time-stamped. I began cataloging footage, noting structural changes, equipment handling, and even casual remarks about improving the layout that clearly contradicted the base's established protocols. While reviewing the contracts, I reflected on my past experience managing complex operations under pressure. I remembered deployments where every decision carried consequences for lives, logistics, and strategy. The same principles applied here. Observe, analyze, anticipate, and act decisively when the time was right. My leverage wasn't just legal. It was procedural, operational, and rooted in years of experience that Kyler could neither match nor appreciate. I noticed a clause in one of the trust agreements that had been overlooked for decades, specifying that any structural or operational changes required approval from the property trustee. That trustee, as it happened, was a position I now held formally, giving me the authority to intervene without recourse to prolonged disputes. I made a note to prepare documentation for immediate use, thinking through how to present it to prevent any delays and minimize collateral disruption. Every word of the clause mattered, and I knew that presenting it at the right moment would change the entire dynamic. Beyond legal documents, I considered the practical leverage I had. Access to the network, cameras, and historical maintenance logs provided a clear picture of structural integrity and operational protocols. I could anticipate the consequences of any unauthorized work before it happened. Watching Kyler's team move through the hallways, I cataloged potential risks, noting where equipment could be compromised and which actions could endanger both personnel and property. This knowledge was power, and patience was the tool I would use to wield it. I reflected again on my personal stakes, the time invested in this base, and the mentorship I had provided over the years. New officers had benefited from my guidance, yet now I had to use my understanding of the system and its people to safeguard the legacy. My strategy took shape in my mind. A careful, quiet assertion of authority, leveraging both legal and operational knowledge to regain control. I didn't need confrontation or spectacle. The facts themselves would speak volumes when applied at the right moment. By the time the night ended, I had a clear plan. Contracts were organized, camera footage cataloged, and operational vulnerabilities identified. Kyler's moves were predictable once patterns were understood, and the combination of legal authority and tactical oversight gave me a distinct advantage. I leaned back, breathing slowly, letting the anticipation build. The leverage was mine to use, but timing and precision would determine its effectiveness. Every misstep Kyler made now became a potential turning point, and I was ready to act when the moment arrived. I spent the morning moving quietly through the corridors, keeping a careful distance from Kyler as he inspected the modifications his team was making. Every gesture he made, every instruction he gave, was cataloged in my mind and on the surveillance monitors I had retained access to. I knew the building better than anyone, the layout of load-bearing walls, the placement of critical equipment, and the weak points that could compromise both operations and safety. Harper and I connected over a secure line, our conversation measured and precise. He understood the stakes and the need for a calculated approach. We coordinated timing, agreed on evidence collection, and reviewed the legal ramifications of every possible intervention. I emphasized that the operation needed to be clean, with maximum impact but zero ambiguity, ensuring that authority and facts would do the work for us rather than emotion or confrontation. I returned to my office and began documenting everything. Screenshots from the security cameras were labeled, time-stamped, and cross-referenced with past maintenance records. Each photograph, each video clip, reinforced the argument that Kyler's actions were not just unauthorized but dangerous. I noted structural concerns, identifying where potential collapses could occur and which systems were most at risk. It wasn't about sabotage, it was about demonstrating the consequences of ignorance and overreach. I checked the legal files once more, making sure the clauses granting me oversight were highlighted and ready for presentation. Clause 12, subsection C, detailed the requirement for trustee approval for structural or operational changes, a clause that had been forgotten or ignored by the current command. I prepared copies for Harper and myself, ensuring that we could deploy them at a precise moment to stop the project before it crossed a line. Timing, I knew, was everything. The base moved around me, unaware that every footstep, every misplaced beam, was being observed. Kyler's team continued their work with unrestrained confidence, oblivious to the leverage I held. I watched their progress, noting which individuals might hesitate when confronted with authority and which would follow orders blindly. This mapping of behavior was crucial. It allowed me to anticipate reactions and plan my intervention to maximize both safety and psychological impact. I ran through the sequence in my mind several times, like rehearsing a maneuver in the field. Harper would be ready with legal documentation, the cameras would provide indisputable evidence, and the chain of command could be informed without delay. My own steps would be precise. Approach the site, verify the structural impact, and trigger the intervention with authority and clarity. There was no room for error, and every precaution was accounted for. By late afternoon, I was ready. Every document was organized, every camera angle monitored, and every variable considered. I reviewed the plan with Harper one last time, confirming signals and contingencies. Kyler's confidence remained high, completely unaware of the trap being set. I allowed a quiet satisfaction to settle in, knowing that when the moment came, the combination of preparation, timing, and authority would render confrontation unnecessary. The scene was set, and the next act would unfold exactly as planned. I took a brief walk outside, observing the base from a distance, imagining the chain reaction that would occur when the plan was enacted. The sun was low, casting long shadows across the grounds, and I noted every access point, every potential escape route, and every bystander who might need guidance. The trap wasn't about theatrics. It was about precision, control, and ensuring that the right outcome was achieved with minimal disruption. I returned to my office with a calm mind, fully aware that patience had brought me to this critical juncture, and the leverage I had meticulously prepared would soon speak for itself. Kyler had begun the unauthorized demolition before anyone realized the full scope of his plan. The walls that supported vital equipment were being altered, and the hum of machinery echoed through the halls as his team wielded tools with unchecked confidence. I stayed back, observing through the security monitors, noting every swing, every misstep, and every violation of protocol that would support the intervention I had prepared. I activated Harper, who moved quickly to coordinate with base authorities, ensuring that legal and operational measures were in place before stepping into the fray. I compiled the documentation and evidence into a single, organized packet, highlighting the clauses in the trust agreement and the risks of structural compromise. Every photograph, video clip, and time-stamped record reinforced the legitimacy of the action we were about to take, leaving no room for denial or misinterpretation. The moment I stepped onto the floor, I felt the shift in the room. Kyler, confident moments before, froze mid-motion when he recognized the presence of authority and the stack of documentation I held. His eyes widened slightly, betraying the realization that the confidence he had carried into this unauthorized action was about to collide with facts he could not ignore. I approached calmly, maintaining eye contact and a measured tone, signaling that this was not personal revenge but a necessary correction to prevent danger and uphold the rules. Kyler tried to justify the work, gesturing toward the modifications as progress, innovation, and modernization. I listened, letting him speak, and then calmly laid out the evidence, clause by clause, demonstrating how his actions violated the agreements and endangered the base. Each point was supported with time-stamped footage and structural assessments, leaving no ambiguity. The tension in the room was palpable. The team stopped, tools suspended midair as they realized they were operating under authority they had overlooked. Harper quietly stepped in, reinforcing the legal and operational consequences, and I felt the room tilt toward clarity. Kyler's attempts at persuasion faltered, the bravado slipping as the reality of his errors became undeniable. I emphasized the importance of safety and the chain of command, framing the intervention as a matter of protecting lives and infrastructure rather than personal victory. The clarity and calm in my delivery contrasted with the chaos that had begun to emerge, showing that control was rooted in preparation and knowledge. As the intervention proceeded, I guided Kyler and his team through halting the demolition and securing the area. The cameras captured compliance, and the structural team verified that no further risk existed. The immediate danger was neutralized, and Kyler's posture shifted from confident to resigned, the understanding of authority sinking in. The moral high ground was evident, and the room's focus turned to rectifying the situation rather than assigning blame. In the aftermath, I reviewed the secured documentation and ensured that all evidence was properly filed with Harper and the command chain. Kyler, no longer the dominant figure he had assumed to be, accepted guidance and oversight, understanding that the rules were in place for a reason. My objective had never been revenge. It was justice, safety, and preserving the integrity of the base. The satisfaction was quiet but profound, knowing that preparation, patience, and strategic leverage had won without unnecessary confrontation or harm. By the time the team resumed normal operations, the message was clear: authority and knowledge mattered, and actions had consequences. Kyler's attempts to rewrite the rules had been halted decisively, and the lessons were visible to everyone present. I walked away from the area with a sense of calm, letting the resolution settle in, confident that the base, the team, and the legacy I had protected were secure. The confrontation was over, but the principles it reinforced would resonate far longer than the moment itself. Kyler had started the demolition before anyone realized how far he would go. The walls that supported vital equipment were being pried apart, and the echo of hammers reverberated through the base. I stayed back, observing everything through the security monitors I had maintained access to, cataloging every swing, every misstep, every rule being broken. I called Harper on a secure line, and he confirmed that legal and operational authority was in place to intervene. I organized the documentation, highlighting the clauses in the trust agreement and the risks of structural compromise. Each photograph, video clip, and time-stamped record reinforced the case, leaving no room for denial or ambiguity. As I stepped onto the floor, I felt the tension shift immediately. Kyler froze mid-swing, his confidence faltering the instant he saw me holding the files. His eyes widened as he realized that every careless decision, every violation, was now documented and backed by authority, and the smug assurance he had carried in the room vanished. He tried to justify the work, claiming innovation and efficiency, but I calmly laid out the evidence, clause by clause, pointing out how his actions violated the agreements and endangered personnel and equipment. The team stopped in their tracks, tools suspended in midair. As the weight of the situation became clear, my voice remained steady, conveying control and clarity, showing that this was not revenge but enforcement of rules and safety. Harper moved in to reinforce the legal ramifications, his presence underscoring the seriousness of the situation. Kyler's bravado crumbled further as the facts were laid bare, the consequences undeniable. I emphasized the importance of safeguarding the base and the people within it, framing every intervention as a matter of responsibility rather than personal victory. The immediate danger was neutralized as the team halted demolition and secured the area. The cameras documented compliance and structural checks verified that no further risk existed. Kyler's posture shifted from arrogance to resignation, and the authority of law and preparation became evident to everyone present. The tension eased, replaced by a sense of order and understanding of the proper chain of command. I reviewed the evidence once more, making sure every file and recording was properly secured with Harper and the command chain. Kyler, no longer the dominating figure, was now subject to oversight, realizing that actions carried consequences. My objective had never been revenge. It was justice, safety, and preservation of integrity. The satisfaction was quiet but profound, the outcome rooted in patience, preparation, and strategic leverage rather than confrontation. By the time normal operations resumed, the message was clear. Authority and knowledge mattered, and everyone understood the importance of adhering to the rules. Kyler's attempt to override experience and expertise had been decisively halted. I walked away from the site with calm confidence, letting the resolution settle, knowing that the base, its team, and its legacy were secure. The confrontation was over, but the lessons of vigilance, patience, and integrity would resonate far beyond that day. With the base secured and operations restored, I finally allowed myself a moment to reflect. Kyler had been held accountable, the rules enforced, and the team could return to their duties with clarity and safety intact. Walking through the quiet corridors, I felt the weight of years of service and dedication settling comfortably on my shoulders, a reminder that patience and preparation often outlast impulsive action. I thought about the lessons learned from the confrontation. Patience was not passive, it was strategic, a tool to observe, calculate, and act when the moment was right. Understanding the full scope of one's environment, the systems in place, and the responsibilities carried by both oneself and others was crucial. Acting with integrity meant using authority wisely, not for personal gain, but to uphold principles, protect people, and preserve the work others had contributed. The satisfaction of the day was quiet but profound. I did not need applause or recognition. The real victory lay in preserving the base, the mission, and the legacy entrusted to me. Watching Kyler accept oversight and compliance reinforced the importance of careful preparation and measured action, showing that knowledge and experience could shape outcomes more effectively than confrontation or anger. As I looked at the familiar walls, the equipment, and the spaces I had once helped design, I realized that standing up for what is right requires more than courage. It requires foresight and a clear understanding of the rules, responsibilities, and potential consequences. Planning carefully, observing attentively, and acting decisively when the time is right allows justice to prevail in a way that preserves dignity for all involved. I left the base that evening with a calm satisfaction, knowing that the lessons extended far beyond any single confrontation. For anyone watching, the takeaway is simple: defend your values, use your knowledge, and remain patient in the face of challenges. Power and authority mean little without responsibility, and the true measure of success lies in protecting what matters most while acting with integrity, wisdom, and foresight.